Hello, this is GeoTopFlex. In this video, I will be speaking about the Northeastern United States. On the screen, that is my WordPress posts, the Northeastern United States. Different interesting quirks about the 9 states in the region. This post covers the states of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania in that order. I may not get every individual fact or detail, but I can get as much as I can reasonably expect to know out of each state. The most important pieces, to me specifically anyway, maybe your thoughts are a little different, but in Maine, it is beyond the northern terminus of the coastal plain, so the land may be fairly similar, even if there are cultural distinctions between Maine and the left coast or west coast. But that also means that Maine has a unique experience relative to the East Coast at large. More typical of the West Coast by land, but maybe not culture. But that is because mountains dive right into the ocean, really. Also of interest are the numerous art colonies in the state, particularly around Ogunquit and Kennebunkport. But there are numerous other art colonies, especially in York County, Maine's southernmost county. And potato farming is important in Aroostook or Aroostook County. Feel free to tell me in the comments which pronunciation is preferred, especially if you're from Maine, or I think New Brunswick, Canada can also tell me if it's Aroostook or if it's Aroostook. But here we go. It is surprisingly prevalent in the east, and in the west of that county, timber is largely the dominant industry. Now, Mount Katahdin, it's the highest point. It is also the Appalachian Trail, or if you're further south, Appalachian Trail's northern terminus. It is located within Baxter State Park, and in some ways, Maine might resemble Alaska in its road network on the map, even though that isn't really a fair comparison. Maine also is similar to Alaska with unorganized territories, except that the counties are not like boroughs. Alaska has unorganized borough areas, where there are areas not part of any borough, but all of Maine is covered within the county system, just not necessarily in the town system. An important distinction is the very small communities. There are very small communities known as plantations, especially in Aroostook, and then we have the unincorporated communities. New Hampshire is uniquely associated with the White Mountains. Mount Washington is not just the highest in New Hampshire, it's actually the highest in the state. And while the weather claim may in fact be a marketing slogan, the summit of the mountain has largely been the subject of infamy for extremely high winds, wind speeds, and wind gusts. Now, yes, while it is the highest in the Northeast as an entire region, it is not necessarily the most important. For hiking, it is not nearly as famous as Mount Katahdin, because Mount Katahdin is the northern terminus. But Mount Washington, now, New Hampshire, also, too bad I have to say this, I'm sorry that I have to stress this, but circa 2003 was when the old man of the mountain would have eroded. So it eroded, it's still on state highway markers. I think state license plates might have Old Man of the Mountain. Feel free to tell me in the comments if you know what Old Man of the Mountain means. Like in Maine, the population density increases in the south and decreases in the north, but overall, New Hampshire has a higher population density than Maine. While Maine is the lowest population density of any state east of Kansas, New Hampshire has a population density basically reflecting the population density average of the entire world. Mount Monadnock is a feature of the southwest of New Hampshire, a relatively isolated mountain, thus a Monadnock or Inselberg. It is around Keene, New Hampshire, in Cheshire County. And yes, it's relatively isolated in the larger region. Now, Vermont is actually an interesting state because it is the Green Mountain State. While the state is often compared to New Hampshire in scenic natural beauty, many of the policies are actually more similar to Maine than New Hampshire. Also, Vermont is particularly known for progressive policies, renewable energy, and for producing about half of the nation's supply of maple syrup. While the Green Mountains are the chief mountain range of the state of Vermont, Vermont is also known for Lake Champlain, where Burlington is located nearby. Lake Champlain also has islands, the island chain of Grand Isle and the Alberg, I was not sure, I always called it Alberg Spit. I think it's Alberg Tongue, which is actually a peninsula that jets into the U.S. and is only in the U.S. because the Canadian border is defined by the 45th parallel north. Now, also of interest, again, Lake Champlain is on the border with New York, although most of the islands are, in fact, in Grand Isle County, Vermont, and so is the Alberg Tongue, which is in Vermont rather than Quebec, Canada, because of this latitude line, making it one of the exclaves. Also, Alberg is unique amongst the exclaves because unlike Point Roberts, Washington, the Northwest Angle, Minnesota, an unnamed point in North Dakota, or really any other possible exclave, Alberg, Vermont will still allow you to access the mainland without leaving the United States. There is a bridge to cross into the state of New York without leaving the U.S. That is the US 2 bridge, Rouse's Point, and then Vermont 78, that's the one that takes you towards Swanton, Vermont, which is in Franklin County. You will end up north of the town of Georgia, and you'll need to pass through Georgia to get to St. Albans. Or you can go through the entire Champlain Island chain. I think Vermont 127 takes you to Isle La Motte. That would be out of your way, though, if you're trying to get to Burlington. Now, also, Lake Champlain, and then further upstream, further south along the New York state line, we have the Poultney River. The Poultney River forms a large portion of the Vermont-New York state line up until roughly the town of Poultney, Rutland County, Vermont, and then we become a straight line the rest of the way south, I believe. Now, we actually go from west by northwest to east by southeast on the line between Vermont and Massachusetts the entire way. And, of course, the line with New Hampshire is dictated by the Connecticut River. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts is of particular importance as well because, for historical reference, the General Henry Knox Cannon Trail, because for the American Revolution, Henry Knox actually had to, I believe, march from around Ticonderoga, which is now in Essex County, New York, in the Adirondack Park, to the city of Boston, or at least what is Boston today, anyway, or around, or its whereabouts, but it is of historical importance throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts from west to east. Yes, because General Henry Knox, so he would have gone in a north to south directionality through that eastern part of New York, and then turned to roughly west to east for Massachusetts. So yeah, crossed the line and was kind of at an angle, never actually getting into Vermont. There are actually plaques in each of the communities, I believe, that General Henry Knox would have passed through on his cannon trail back in the day. So I think that there are memorial plaques on all the towns, all the cities, all the villages and whatnot that have ever been passed through by the Henry Knox Cannon Trail. Now, the Commonwealth also maintains substantially different subcultures depending on specific regions located within. Again, I do not believe I can capture all the possible subcultures, but the examples are the Berkshires, which are essentially comparable to a southward extension of Vermont and a northward extension of the Taconic Mountains over crossing west into New York. We also have Pioneer Valley as a showcase of vibrant communities, including the 5 colleges of Hampshire County, and, as surprising as it may sound, birthplace of both volleyball, although the inventor, I believe, was born in Lockport, New York, and basketball, though the inventor, James Naismith, was born in Ontario, Canada. Further east, we become more highly associated with vibrant city and town life in Massachusetts, and relatively flatter topography while also becoming increasingly influenced by the city of Boston, and because of the Boston influence, the New York City influence diminishes dramatically going from west to east, while the Berkshires can be influenced by New York City. Yeah, New York City, we have Boston influence, because Boston, yes, it's the state capital, it's the largest city in Massachusetts and in all of New England, Yet the westernmost part of Massachusetts is more culturally connected to that westernmost part of Connecticut in parts as well. Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, and over on the New York state line as well. I believe that we have counties like Dutchess and surrounding counties may not necessarily be on the Massachusetts line as much as the Connecticut line, but that general area tends to be more connected to New York City. We also look at the possibilities of difference in the east as well. Cape Cod, the Elizabeth Islands, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket Island contain cultural traits clearly distinct from the remainder of eastern Massachusetts, which is the region centered around Boston. We also have historical distinctions between Boston and Plymouth, of course. The differences between the Puritans and the Pilgrims, respectively. Pilgrims, I believe, came first, then Puritans, but Pilgrims would be absorbed into Puritans eventually. Puritans are no longer a thing today. We also have that the greater Boston area tends to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, DEI, and often, but not necessarily always, at the forefront in LGBTQI+ advocacy rights and in freedom of identity and expression. Anti-capitalist groups, as may exist in occasional spaces throughout much of Vermont, are also expected portions of the cultural fabric of the Berkshires in different locations, whether it is North Adams, Lee, Pittsfield, Great Barrington, or another community nearby. Berkshire is also the county of Susan B. Anthony's birthplace, by the way. In Rhode Island, although Providence may appear relatively close to Boston on a map, the two cities are clearly distinct, and it is not really appropriate to refer to Providence as subordinate to Boston. It is not a suburb, it is not a satellite city. Providence is not part of Boston itself or its metropolitan area, but it is part of a combined statistical area with Boston at the forefront. The city of Providence is comparable to the city of Boston. Both are state capitals. They're the two state capitals closest to one another, Providence and Rhode Island, but Boston and Massachusetts. So this is because this is through heuristics. It's the closest pair. While Rhode Island may be minuscule in form, the compact nature of the state, the compact nature does not underscore the importance in American history to have a state founded by Roger Williams and associated with principles, Quaker principles, after being banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and also Anne Hutchinson's beliefs also play a role in the state of Rhode Island's early history. Apart from the greater Providence area, however, the communities at Charlestown, which is in modern Washington County, Westerly, also in modern Washington County in the very southwest, westernmost in Rhode Island as a whole state, and even New Shoreham, which is on Block Island, which actually, Block Island is not anywhere near the mainland in particular. It's somewhere east off Montauk of New York. Montauk is the easternmost of all of Long Island. Block Island is just your next island to the east. So Block Island, we have it as part of Rhode Island, Montauk part of New York. Now, that's right, New Shoreham is also of particular importance. I could keep going and speak about the connections between Block Island and Westerly, but now while Massachusetts and Rhode Island are often interconnected in parts, especially with the south coast area of the former, obviously Massachusetts, being connected particularly to the communities in Rhode Island, such as with New Bedford being a whaling community, and with communities like Taunton, Attleboro, Fall River, and even communities such as Swansea and Seekonk existing in relatively close proximity to Providence, and also the fact that sometimes Providence city limits can get within 2 miles of the Massachusetts state line. Connecticut is different. It is also an interesting and complicated state on its own, independently of looking at Massachusetts and Rhode Island. You can look at Connecticut and find some clearly distinct cultural traits from Massachusetts and Rhode Island, even though the New England and Yankee identity overall and the backbone can feel very similar or nearly the same. Connecticut is also a patchwork of different entities and different identities, rather. While rural areas exist, especially in the northeast corner, in mostly Windham, but also eastern part of tradition. These are traditional counties, by the way. Tolland County, You can also look at Litchfield County in the very northwest and find similarly rural areas, but the northeast is where the quiet corner occurs. Once you get to the western side of Connecticut along, say, US Route 7, US 7, you're not far from the New York state line at all, and you do have more of a culture in those rural areas, but the quiet corner, you might think of Storrs, Connecticut, or Willimantic. Willimantic is sometimes included in the quiet corner discussions, but may or may not be necessarily included in them depending on who you ask. I think Willimantic is home to Eastern Connecticut State University, by the way, so that might also be a reason that it may or may not be included, even though it's geographically part of the quiet corner. Now, apart from looking at the quiet corner, when we look at the urbanized parts of Connecticut, the state is predominantly associated with Hartford and New Haven, although Bridgeport and the New York City metropolitan area, I believe, being in the traditional Fairfield County, Bridgeport is the largest. We also have communities like Greenwich and Stamford, for instance, and that's Stamford with an M, not Stanford with an N, but Stamford, Connecticut, Greenwich, Connecticut, Bridgeport, all those Fairfield County communities, they can be more identified by the New York area as opposed to being like the rest of New England. But Connecticut's unique identity is more associated with the state capital at Hartford or the slightly larger city of New Haven on Long Island Sound. Cross Long Island Sound and then Long Island belongs to the state of New York for its entirety. The eastern part of Long Island has some strong similarities and cultural traits with Connecticut. As you go east and get toward Orient, Montauk, or other communities on that eastern side of Suffolk County, you might feel like you're culturally in a New England-like area, and that does make sense because Southold and Southampton, Southold was literally settled by New Haven colonists and Southampton by Massachusetts Bay colonists. And yes, New Netherland did have interference. New Netherland would settle mainly on the west side. The English and later British would mainly be on the east side in modern Suffolk County. So very strong cultural connections. But today, again, Fairfield County, as I'd already mentioned, is often associated with New York rather than New England, but can still be considered with New England traditional values. Unlike the aforementioned states, which are all part of New England, New York is a relatively diverse state, whether in area, population, demographics, or even landscapes. 10 identifiable regions. Now, you could divide the state up into even more regions that exist within this. Sorry about the misspelling. I said exit. Now, 10 different regions exist within the state of New York. Downstate refers to New York City and remaining portions of both Long Island and suburban areas slightly to the north. You can also narrow down the downstate region further. New York City has its 5 boroughs. You have Manhattan, you have Brooklyn, you have Queens, you have the Bronx, and you have Staten Island. You can also identify it as the city proper versus some of the suburban areas. I know that some of the first suburbs, in most cases, obviously, if you look back at history books and learn more about the modern suburban definition is the post-war definition, which is more commonly found as you go further east. It's predominantly Suffolk County, whereas Nassau County, which used to be part of Queens County, but Queens and Nassau would break off from it in 1899. Only the western 40% of Queens is part of New York City. The eastern 60% is called Nassau County and not part of New York City in any way, shape, or form. However, again, Nassau feels like you're still in New York City, even though you might not be in New York City at all. Mineola is the county seat, and it, for instance, feels like another part of New York City rather than something that might be more suburban, based on its age and whatnot. Suffolk County has Riverhead, but Hauppauge also has government offices. Riverhead's in the middle, Hauppauge is in the west of the county. And Islip is an interesting town in Suffolk County, New York. It probably deserves its own video. If you know anyone or anything from Islip, the town of Islip, that can tell me more about or comment on things about what makes your town unique, and it doesn't have to be Islip in Suffolk County, but really any town, I'm open to I'm open to learning more about cities, towns, villages in the region for any future GeoTop Flex or even FutoTop Flex content. And by the way, I actually have 3 different YouTube channels. GeoTop Flex is geography, and Futo is third identity. It's where I do the cultural content that's less geographic and more purely cultural. But this video does involve geography as well. So what I'm going to have to say, so I already said a lot about the downstate. Now the Hudson Valley is essentially the northward continuation, not just Westchester County, but further north still. You might have on the west side Rockland, Orange counties and whatnot. But as you go further west, and that, if you go in the northwestern direction, that's also the Hasidic, Jewish, and Ukrainian, otherwise Slavic communities. That's the Borscht Belt, named for borscht, which is a Ukrainian dish, which I think borscht is really more like a soup situation. It's more a soup thing, if anything. And then the Capital District is specifically the region surrounding the capital city, Albany. The Thousand Islands, the Adirondack Park, and intermediate areas between the Thousand Islands and Adirondack Park, such as Canton, Potsdam, and Malone, they can all go together and be referred to collectively as the North Country of the state. And that part of the state with Canton, Potsdam, Malone, etc., it's the real region, it's the actual region of New York that's supposed to be referred to as upstate. Not the entire region that's stereotyped as upstate, downstate. It's complicated. The entire region of the state of New York that exists west of the Finger Lakes, so if you're west of, I think Seneca Lake, if I know right, it's the westernmost Finger Lake. If you're further west than that, to any significant extent, that's western New York. Now, the Finger Lakes region is distinct, with the more easterly regions including central New York, the Mohawk Valley, and by the way, central New York might be Syracuse, and the Mohawk Valley might be Utica or Herkimer or whatnot. Or Rome, New York. I know Rome, Utica, those are the same county, and there are a few other communities in addition to Rome and Utica within Oneida County. Herkimer is Herkimer County, and German Flats is a town on the other side, and largest in that Herkimer County. Herkimer is part of the Mohawk Valley, and then the Catskills, also, the Borscht Belt is somewhere in an intermediate zone between the Hudson Valley and the Catskills, but mainly the Catskills. And Kiryas Joel is, or not sure how to pronounce that name, but that is a Hasidic Jewish community, I believe. And I believe that shtetl is the Jewish term. I'm not sure if that's the appropriate Jewish term to refer to this Kiryas Joel place in Orange County, but yes. And then along the Pennsylvania line, that southern portion of the upstate, along the part of the Pennsylvania line with New York dictated by the 42nd parallel, specifically latitude 42 north, that's the southern tier. And you can also divide the southern tier because Elmira, Corning, Binghamton, Endicott rather, and Johnson City, for instance, they can also have their own distinct identity. So you can divide it up still. Bath, Hornell, Corning, that's Steuben County, and they might not be connected to Chemung or Chemung County or whatnot. Is it Chemung, Chemung, or a different pronunciation entirely? Feel free to say in the comments if you know what the pronunciation is for corrections for a future video. And then Binghamton, as I already mentioned, that's southern tier. Although numerous place names exist within the state of New York with clearly distinct etymologies, whether Dutch, English, indigenous, mixed, or otherwise, the state of New York remains extremely interesting because it has multiple competing identities, and these identities depend on exactly where you are located within the state. The state of New Jersey, though often overshadowed by neighboring states New York and Pennsylvania, because New York has New York City, Pennsylvania has Philadelphia, New Jersey does not have much in terms of major cities at all. And for the most part, they're just satellite cities, and there's not really too much to do. If you're a tourist, you're probably going to overlook New Jersey, except maybe the Jersey Shore. Not much is there in Newark, Jersey City, but then not much is there to do in the boroughs of New York outside Manhattan either. Although even then, you have more tourist attractions, obviously being in New York City, even if it's not Manhattan, basically you're getting to the point where it feels more like you're on the Jersey side when you're in Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, or Staten Island. But New Jersey is its own thing and feels like it's even lesser or more suburban because it kind of is. But it still has some very lively communities within North Jersey, especially, even though they're not nearly as obvious, and even though it's not really the hustle bustle culture or the tourist driven culture of New York City. When you're in New Jersey, you do not really have a whole lot of places, and the largest city is not too much higher than, if anything, I don't know if the largest city, I don't know if New York's largest city exists with over 200,000 or if it's still under 200,000, but I do know of numerous cities that exist within the state of New Jersey. Trenton is the state capital, and it's not far away from Philadelphia at all. It's kind of central Jersey, located along the Delaware River, Princeton a little bit further to the northeast, and Trenton almost directly across the Delaware from Philadelphia. But further downstream is Philadelphia on the Pennsylvania side. Camden is the real city opposite Philadelphia as opposed to Trenton. Now, North Jersey, we have places like, and these places can feel like core cities rather than satellites or bedroom communities or anything. Sometimes you'll feel like you're in the main or principal city rather than any satellite. It's the cities that kind of feel like principal cities, even though they may not be principal cities for the region, exist in North Jersey, with powerful communities in Newark, Jersey City, Paterson, Elizabeth, New Brunswick, and to a lesser and more suburban extent, places like Morristown as well. But then we also have some relatively rural areas of the state, especially in pockets in Sussex County and the very north or northwest, whatever you would like to say. Even though you're not too far from smaller communities like Port Jervis, New York, or Matamoros, Pennsylvania, the New Jersey side of the tri-state, that immediate area, is relatively rural in comparison, with not too much in Sussex County. There's even less in the Pine Barrens region in South Jersey. There is a lot of rural area within that South Jersey region. Obviously, not much in the road network or anything. It's very rural compared to even rural areas in places like Ohio, where the population can seem more evenly spread out. But New Jersey is its own league in that way. And even with its rural areas existing, especially in a large swath of South Jersey, the North Jersey and South Jersey divide, or historically west-east today, New Jersey is actually the most densely populated state. And second place is the aforementioned Rhode Island. Now, because it is the most densely populated state, I, as novaTop Flex, GeoTop Flex, PutoTop Flex, identify the state of New Jersey as nationally the most productive and possibly amongst the nation's most undervalued, but that depends on metrics. Not everyone will define productivity as possible or say that density is actually that conducive to productivity, but it's a personal opinion. You do not have to agree with all my opinions, and I do not have to agree with all of yours either. But yeah, that's just New Jersey. Now with Pennsylvania, unlike the states further to the north and east, Pennsylvania, known as a keystone state, continues to exist as a bridge or keystone between regions, with a land area ranging from what is considered Yankeedom in the north to the Mid-Atlantic in the south, and from the eastern United States to the east to the Midwest in the west. There are also some cultural sub-regions within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, like the Susquehanna Valley versus the area around Harrisburg, the state capital, versus the area around even the Lehigh Valley, Allentown, or Philadelphia, or when we get to the Alleghenies and Pittsburgh, or the area just a little bit further to the east, central Pennsylvania, Johnstown, Altoona, State College. Even the Erie Triangle has its own distinct elements. All 67 counties in Pennsylvania have a unique story to tell, like many of the other states, especially in the Northeast. Especially the Northeast, we have counties that have their own unique story, and you cannot understand one without understanding the others in some cases as well. But yes, Some counties, like Sullivan County, may only have one traffic light. I don't know if there are other counties in Pennsylvania with only one traffic light, and that's in Dushore, while LaPorte's the county seat has no traffic light. And northern Pennsylvania, as a general region, the Pennsylvania Wilds, as it is often called, northern Pennsylvania is not a significant place in any way. It's actually the part of Pennsylvania that's very sparsely populated, especially in the northern tier of Pennsylvania, opposite the southern tier of New York. Because in that region, Elmira, Binghamton, Corning, the major-ish cities, all exist in New York, and none of them exist in Pennsylvania until you get somewhat further south, like around Scranton or even Wilkes-Barre, even further to the south and west. While the moniker may no longer be accurate physically or geographically in the Commonwealth, the cultural characteristics that define a crossroads region continue to exist into the modern day in Pennsylvania, while Amish, Mennonite, and to a significantly lesser extent Quaker communities continue to exist well into the modern day. The Commonwealth continues to serve the entire population, regardless of how extensively individuals and communities maintain conformity to traditional social roles and constructs or preserve unique cultural characteristics, customs, or heritage. Not all groups in Pennsylvania conform to the same traditions throughout, but most notably, Amish and Mennonite traditions continue to exist to this day, including the Pennsylvania Dutch traditions and other associated horse, buggy, etc. Now, the traditions, if you know anything about the Amish communities in, say, Holmes or Geauga counties, Ohio, the Lancaster County, Pennsylvania Amish, they're often different. Customs are different between Pennsylvania and Ohio, even within their group. And now, this is actually also a captivating article for comments, and comments are very common, so with the novaTop Flux WordPress site, inevitable comments will occur. So, yeah. Now, the interesting thing about the Northeastern United States post that I just did as GeoTop Flux was that, yes, I am now being recommended to read about different cultural regions of the United States of America, and yes, Colin Woodard is the name of an author who wrote a book about American nations. On the 11 nations, the true nations, like the European boundaries, as opposed to artificial lines drawn by not just in the US, but Scramble for Africa was also of arbitrary lines. The land may be similar in Maine and in the left coast, but the culture is drastically distinct. Now, this is, by the way, from Paragone, or I'm not sure, on hearme.social, commenting on my posts. So, in North America, understanding where specific cultures are and planning one's experiencing in different regions will make lots of sense. Now, also according to Paragone or whatnot, I'm not sure how to say this, Paragone at hearme.social. And sorry if Paragone is watching this also. But Foreign to Familiar by Lanier, the North American Class System book by Fussell, and Hofstede's book, I'm not sure how to say that last name, Hofstede. This book, Exploring Culture, can be eye-opening also, according to whoever this person is, and would be massively good investments before going traveling. When Lanier explained that, unsure, this person thought it was Carter, but was unsure. Supposedly went to the Middle East, spending 3 days talking with his counterpart about family, before getting down to brass tacks, which is a tropical culture element. So, very distinct cultures going from Nordic to tropical, how each culture works, how it differs, now different people have different perspectives on culture. Some people actually prefer tropical cultures over Nordic cultures, and others may be better suited in Nordic cultures, or may be better suited to specific latitude lines, longitude lines. Now, it's just a coincidence if you think that all cultures north of a certain latitude line are more respectful. Now, I'm not trying to endorse or say anything for or against anyone. This is just neutral. Some people believe that they're better off in the north, or that they're better fit up north. Others believe they're better fit in tropical areas. Different personalities can have different opinions and everything. And it's true, and same with all the other cultures of the Americas, so differently wired. So there are many different books, and The Profoundest Understanding Possible, Again, this is from Paragone, through just 4 books, when seeing North America through different understanding's eyes. If you like this combined geography, culture, history, travel content, and events, feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, hack the YouTube algorithm, and thanks for watching. Until next time, signing off.